If you have ever sat down to do something important and found yourself doing absolutely anything else instead, this audiobook was written for you. In today's audiobook, we explore the procrastinating mind, the heart of Stop Delaying Your Life, published by Stillness Audiobooks. In these pages, we go beyond the surface of simple time management advice, inviting you to reflect deeply on what procrastination truly is, where it lives inside you, and what it has quietly been trying to tell you all along. Most people who struggle with procrastination believe the problem is laziness. They have been told at some point in their lives that they simply need more discipline, more willpower, a better morning routine, and so they try. They set alarms and make lists and download productivity apps and reorganize their desks. And for a day, perhaps two, something shifts. Then, slowly and almost imperceptibly, the familiar heaviness returns. The open tab that never gets clicked. The email that stays in draft. The project that lives in a notebook, half-formed, quietly accumulating weight. What we rarely stop to ask is this: why? Not in a surface-level way, but genuinely and with curiosity. Why does a person who is clearly intelligent, clearly capable, clearly aware of the consequences, still find themselves unable to begin? Why does the mind, when faced with something meaningful, so often turn away? These are the questions this audiobook holds. Across 6 chapters, we will move through the landscape of the procrastinating mind with care and precision. In the first chapter, we trace the true origin of procrastination, not as a flaw of character, but as a deeply learned response. In the second, we examine the internal mechanics at work, the emotional loops and mental negotiations that happen beneath conscious awareness. In the third chapter, we turn to the daily texture of a procrastinating life, how delay shapes relationships, self-image, and the quiet hours before sleep. The fourth chapter brings us into the hidden patterns, the cycles that repeat, the identities that form, the stories the mind tells to protect itself. In the fifth chapter, we explore the natural path toward a different relationship with beginning, not through force, but through understanding. And in the sixth, we arrive at what life begins to look like when the procrastinating mind is no longer the loudest voice in the room. This is not a book of instructions. There are no 10 steps waiting at the end of each chapter. What you will find instead is something rarer, a clear and honest reflection of a mind you may recognize as your own. Let us dive into the root of this chapter by chapter. Before we begin, if this kind of deep reflective content speaks to you, consider following the Stillness Audiobooks channel. New original audiobooks arrive regularly, and having them close means the next moment of stillness is always within reach. Chapter 1. The Origin That Was Never Laziness. There is a story most procrastinators carry about themselves. It is not spoken aloud very often, but it runs beneath the surface of nearly every unfinished task, every missed deadline, every evening spent in distraction instead of purpose. The story goes something like this: I know what I should do. I am simply someone who cannot make myself do it. And embedded in that story is a quiet but devastating conclusion that the problem is me, that I am, at some essential level, broken in a way others are not. This story is wrong, not partially wrong. Entirely wrong, and one of the most valuable things a person can do for themselves is to understand why. Procrastination, as it is commonly observed in human psychology, is not a productivity problem. It is not a time management problem. It is, at its core, an emotional regulation problem. The procrastinating mind is not a lazy mind. It is more often than not a mind that has learned, through experience, through repeated exposure to certain kinds of pressure, that beginning certain tasks produces a feeling too uncomfortable to tolerate. And so it delays. Not out of indifference, but out of a form of protection that once made perfect sense. Consider how this pattern tends to begin. In early experience, many people encounter environments where performance is closely tied to worth. Where doing something well is met with warmth and approval, and doing something poorly is met with disappointment, criticism, or withdrawal. The child in this environment learns something important, that starting means risking failure, that attempting means being seen, and being seen when the environment is unpredictable carries real danger. The mind, which is always working to keep us safe, files this away. Beginning is dangerous. Waiting is safer. What is remarkable is how persistent this early learning becomes. A person can leave that environment entirely. They can grow, travel, build a life that looks nothing like their childhood. And still, when they sit down to write the first line of something important, the old feeling arrives, the tightening in the chest, the sudden and overwhelming need to check something, do something, be anywhere else. The nervous system has remembered what the conscious mind has long since forgotten. Many observe that the tasks most likely to trigger procrastination are not the ones a person cares least about. They are the ones they care about most: the creative project, the difficult conversation, the application for something that truly matters. The higher the stakes, the louder the internal alarm. And so the person who appears from the outside to be avoiding their goals is often from the inside someone in the grip of a very old and very convincing fear. Understanding this does not dissolve the pattern instantly, but it begins something important. It replaces the narrative of laziness with something more accurate and more human. The procrastinating mind is not a failed mind, it is a protected mind. A mind that learned somewhere along the way that stillness was safer than movement, and like all learned things, what was once learned can, over time, be gently and carefully unlearned. This is where the journey begins. Not with a timer or a to-do list, but with the simple and radical act of looking clearly at where the delay truly comes from. Chapter 2. The machinery beneath the surface. If you were to observe the procrastinating mind from the inside, not judge it, simply observe it, what you would find is not emptiness or absence. You would find extraordinary activity, a mind in full motion, negotiating, calculating, rehearsing, imagining, retreating. Procrastination, far from being the absence of mental effort, is often among the most mentally exhausting states a person can inhabit. The machinery works roughly like this. A task appears on the horizon, something that needs to be done, something the person genuinely intends to do. The mind registers it, and then almost immediately a second process begins, an anticipatory simulation. The mind projects forward into the experience of doing the task, and what it encounters there is not neutral. It encounters effort, uncertainty, the possibility of judgment, the risk of falling short. These are not imagined lightly. For many people, this simulation is vivid and emotionally charged. The discomfort that arrives is not a pale shadow of the real thing. It is felt in the body, in the same registers that respond to actual threat. And so the mind, true to its deepest purpose, which is always survival, always protection, initiates avoidance. It turns towards something else, something manageable, something with a clear outcome, a defined edge, a small and reliable reward. Checking messages, tidying a space, watching something, reading something adjacent to the task, but not the task itself. The relief that follows is real, measurable. The nervous system exhales, and this is the beginning of the loop. What makes this loop so durable is that it is continuously reinforced. Avoidance relieves discomfort. Relief is pleasurable. Pleasure reinforces the behavior that produced it. And so the next time the task appears, perhaps with more urgency now, perhaps with added weight, the brain has already mapped a well-worn path away from it. The loop does not require conscious decision. It runs automatically, beneath awareness, with the efficiency of something practiced 10,000 times. There is another layer to this machinery that is worth examining carefully. Many people who procrastinate are also paradoxically very high in what might be described as future self dissonance. They think about their future self as if that person were someone slightly different, someone more capable, more rested, more ready. Tomorrow me will handle this. Next week me will be in a better state. This is not self-deception in a cynical sense. It is a genuine perceptual distortion, and it appears consistently across human experience. The future self feels less real, less vivid, and therefore less deserving of present concern. and so the present self continues to delay, offloading discomfort onto a version of themselves that does not yet have to feel it. What compounds all of this is the inner monologue that runs alongside the avoidance, the self-critical voice that observes the delay and narrates it in the harshest possible terms. You are doing it again. You will never change. You always do this. This voice, though it sounds like accountability, is in fact the opposite. Shame, as is widely observed in human psychology, is not a motivator. It does not produce movement. It produces paralysis. The person drowning in self-criticism is not energized to begin. They are further entrenched, because now the task carries not only the original discomfort, but the additional weight of evidence of personal failure. Understanding the machinery does not stop it immediately, but it creates something essential, a small distance between the person and the process, the moment of recognizing, even briefly, that what is happening is a loop, that the avoidance is not a character truth but a learned mechanism, is the moment when something new becomes possible, not through willpower, through awareness, through the quiet but profound act of watching the machinery run and knowing that you are not the machine. Chapter 3. The Daily Texture of a Delayed Life. There is a particular quality to the days of someone living inside chronic procrastination. It is not, as outsiders sometimes imagine, a life of leisure and ease. It is something closer to the opposite. A life lived in a low, persistent hum of unresolved tension. The tasks that have not been started do not disappear when they are not being done. They remain, they accumulate. They take up space in the mind with a quiet but constant presence, like objects left in a doorway that must be stepped around again and again. The morning often carries a specific weight. There is a moment, usually quite early, when the mind surfaces from sleep, and before the day has fully assembled itself, the unfinished things arrive first. The email, the project, the conversation that keeps being postponed. The mind has not yet had its coffee or its first exchange with another person, and already it is holding debt. Already it is in arrears. For many people who live this way, the morning is the loneliest part of the day, not because they are alone, but because the gap between who they intend to be and who they feel themselves to be is never wider than in those first conscious minutes. The workday, when it comes, carries its own particular choreography. There are intervals of genuine effort, moments when the procrastinating person is in fact working, and working well. Many observers note that people who struggle with procrastination are often highly capable in urgent situations, deadlines, crises, last-hour rushes. These produce a clarity and focus that the ordinary day never quite achieves. The external pressure temporarily overrides the internal resistance. The task gets done. Not without cost, but it gets done. And this becomes, over time, a pattern that is hard to argue with. Why begin early when waiting until the last moment produces results? What this pattern hides is its toll. The results may arrive, but they arrive at the expense of sleep, of calm, of the quiet satisfaction that comes from work done with space and care. The procrastinating person rarely experiences the particular pleasure of finishing something without the shadow of having almost not finished it at all. Their relationship with their own output is permanently tinged with the awareness of how close it came to not existing. The impact on relationships is subtle but real. When a person is living with a large invisible weight of undone things, their presence with others is never fully unencumbered. There is always a part of them that is elsewhere. In a conversation, in an evening with people they love, there is a portion of attention perpetually reserved for the unfinished. This creates a particular form of loneliness, being physically present but psychologically partially absent. Over time, the people in a procrastinator's life may sense this, even without being able to name it. The sense that they do not quite have all of someone. That something is always being withheld, not from coldness but from internal occupation. And then there is the evening, the moment the day closes and the accounting begins. Many people who struggle with procrastination describe the end of the day as the most uncomfortable part, not because something has gone dramatically wrong, but because of the steady accumulation of small deferrals. the hours that did not become what they were meant to become. There is a particular quality of tiredness that has nothing to do with physical exertion, the tiredness of having spent all day managing avoidance, of having been in some sense at war with oneself without a single visible battle. This is the daily texture, not dramatic, not visible from the outside, but deeply felt and deeply wearing. Recognizing it clearly, not with judgment, but with honesty, is the first step towards something different. Chapter 4. The hidden patterns that keep it alive. Procrastination does not persist simply because it has not been noticed. Most people who struggle with it are acutely aware of the pattern. They have named it, analyzed it, made promises about it, and broken those promises more times than they can count. And yet it continues. This is one of the most frustrating aspects of the procrastinating life, the bewildering persistence of something the person fully intends to change. The question worth sitting with then is not whether the pattern is visible, but what keeps it alive even when it is. There are several hidden structures beneath chronic procrastination, and each one has a logic of its own. The first is perfectionism. This connection is well observed and worth examining with care. The perfectionist and the procrastinator are often, in the minds of those who inhabit both, felt as opposites. The perfectionist cares intensely about quality. The procrastinator appears not to care at all. They are not even doing the thing. But the internal experience tells a different story. Many people who procrastinate most severely do so because the standard they hold for their own output is immovably high. To begin is to enter a process that may not produce what they imagine. And so the imagined version, the unwritten essay, the unstarted project, the unmade call, is allowed to remain perfect in its incompleteness. Beginning would risk shattering that perfection with the reality of imperfect execution. The second hidden structure is identity. Over time, a person who has procrastinated consistently begins to absorb it as a self-description. I am someone who procrastinates. This is more than a behavioral observation. It becomes a lens through which new situations are interpreted. Before the task has even begun, the mind has already categorized it as something that will be delayed because that is what this person does. Identity, once formed, is self-reinforcing. The brain actively seeks evidence that confirms its existing models of the self, and so the procrastinating identity, once established, begins to generate its own evidence, making it feel more and more immovable. The third structure is the relationship with discomfort itself. Many people who procrastinate have, without realizing it, developed an unusually low tolerance for the particular discomfort of beginning. Not all discomfort. They may function well through many kinds of difficulty. But the specific emotional texture of uncertainty, of open-endedness, of not yet knowing how something will unfold, this is what the procrastinating mind finds most difficult to sit with. Beginning a task always involves stepping into the unknown. Every creative act, every difficult conversation, every meaningful piece of work begins in a space where the outcome is genuinely uncertain. For the procrastinating mind, this uncertainty has been tagged, perhaps very early, perhaps many times since, as a signal to retreat. The fourth structure, and perhaps the most quietly powerful, is secondary gain. This is the hidden benefit that the pattern provides. Procrastination, in keeping a person from starting, also keeps them from finishing, and not finishing means never having to encounter the full weight of what comes after finishing. If the creative project is never completed, it can never be rejected. If the difficult conversation is never had, the relationship cannot be lost. If the application is never sent, the door cannot close. Delay preserves possibility. It holds open a future that has not yet been foreclosed by action. This is not a conscious calculation, but it is a real one, and it runs beneath the surface of many procrastinating lives with enormous influence. Seeing these patterns clearly is not a comfortable experience, but it is a necessary one, because what can be seen can eventually be worked with. What remains hidden continues to operate without interference. The hidden patterns of procrastination are not signs of irreparable damage. They are signs of a mind that has been doing its best with the tools and experiences it has had. And that mind, this mind, is always capable of learning something new. Chapter 5. The Natural Path Toward Beginning. There is a temptation, when understanding finally arrives, to immediately translate it into strategy, to take the insights of the previous chapters and construct from them a new system, a better routine, a set of rules that will finally solve what all the previous rules failed to solve. This temptation is understandable. And it is worth setting aside, at least for a moment, because it carries within it the same energy that has driven the pattern all along, the belief that the right external structure will overcome an internal condition. The path toward a different relationship with beginning is not primarily a structural one. It is a relational one. It is about changing the relationship between the person and the experience of starting, not by making starting easier through clever tricks, but by making the discomfort of starting less threatening through a deeper and more accurate understanding of what that discomfort actually is. The first movement on this path is what might be described as radical normalization. The procrastinating mind has, for a long time, treated its own avoidance as evidence of something wrong, as proof of a deficiency. The shift here is toward recognizing avoidance as a normal, human, understandable response to a specific kind of emotional discomfort, not something to be ashamed of, but something to be curious about. When the urge to avoid arrives, instead of meeting it with self-criticism, the question becomes simply, what is uncomfortable here? What specifically does beginning this task bring up? Not to solve it, just to name it, to make it visible. This practice of naming is more powerful than it sounds. The mind, when it meets a named and acknowledged feeling, is measurably less driven by it. The unnamed threat that operates in the shadows of awareness holds far more power than the same feeling brought clearly into view. Many people discover when they first practice this that what they have been avoiding for days or weeks carries at its center a feeling that is actually quite small, manageable. Not the enormous obstacle it appeared to be from a distance. The second movement involves a re-examination of the relationship with imperfection. The procrastinating mind, particularly the perfectionist variant, needs a different understanding of what imperfect output actually means. Not that it means nothing, quality matters, effort matters, but that an imperfect beginning is infinitely more valuable than a perfect non-beginning. The first draft, the initial attempt, the rough sketch, these are not failures. They are the necessary raw material from which everything eventually worth producing is made. Changing this relationship does not happen through affirmation. It happens through repeated small experiences of beginning imperfectly and discovering that the world does not end and that the work, more often than not, finds its way toward something worthwhile. The third movement is a gentle but persistent reconnection with the future self. The procrastinating mind, as explored earlier, tends to treat tomorrow's self as a stranger. The practice here is to close that distance slightly, not through dramatic visualization, but through simple and honest acknowledgement. What will it feel like to have started this, not finished it, just started it? Many people find that the most reliable source of motivation is not the imagined reward of completion, but the simple anticipated relief of having begun, of having moved from static to in motion, of having crossed the threshold that has been sitting there, generating weight for days or weeks. None of these movements are techniques in the conventional sense. They do not come with timers or templates. They are practices of attention, of turning toward the internal experience rather than away from it, of meeting the procrastinating mind not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a part of the self that has been doing its best and that deserves, above all else, to be understood. Chapter 6. The Life That Becomes Possible. There is a particular quality of presence that begins to emerge when a person is no longer spending most of their internal resources on managing avoidance. It is difficult to describe precisely because it is an absence as much as a presence, the absence of the constant low-level static that has been running in the background for so long that it has come to feel like the normal texture of being alive. When it quiets, even partially, something else becomes audible, a kind of clarity, a sense of contact with one's own experience that is different from anything that came before. This is not a dramatic transformation. It does not announce itself with certainty or arrive complete. It comes in increments, in small moments that accumulate over time. The morning that feels slightly less weighted, the hour of work that ends with something real having been made, without the shadow of the near miss hanging over it, the conversation that was not postponed, and the unexpected sense of freedom that followed. These are quiet moments. They do not photograph well, but they constitute something profound, the gradual recovery of a life that belongs to the person living it. The relationship with time shifts in a way that is hard to predict, but consistently reported. Time, for the chronic procrastinator, is experienced largely as an adversary, something to be managed, to be manipulated, to be negotiated with. Deadlines loom, hours disappear. The present moment is rarely inhabited fully because it is always being experienced in relation to the things it should contain, but does not. As the procrastinating patterns soften, time begins to feel different, less hostile, more available. The present moment, freed from the weight of everything that is not happening in it, becomes a more livable place. Work changes quality, not just quantity. Many people who have moved through this process describe discovering, for perhaps the first time, what it is like to be genuinely absorbed in something they have chosen to do. The state that common human experience associates with deep engagement, where time disappears, where the self dissolves slightly into the activity, where effort stops feeling like effort. This becomes accessible in a way it was not before. It was always available, in theory. But it is hard to enter a state of absorption when half the mind is elsewhere, managing avoidance, negotiating with guilt. Relationships shift too. The person who is no longer perpetually occupied with an invisible internal burden becomes more present, not perfectly present. Full presence is rare for any human being, but more available, less encumbered. The conversations become fuller. The evenings feel less like failed reckonings and more like actual rest. There is something in the quality of one's presence with others that changes when one is no longer secretly apologizing, in every moment, for the version of themselves that should have existed and did not. Perhaps most significantly, the relationship with the self changes. The self-critical narrative that ran alongside the procrastination, the voice that catalogued every delay as evidence of fundamental inadequacy, begins to lose its authority. Not because it is silenced by force, but because the evidence for it stops accumulating. Small completions, small beginnings, small moments of doing the thing that was uncomfortable. These are the experiences that quietly rewrite the story, not through grand gestures, through the patient accumulation of a different kind of proof. The procrastinating mind does not disappear entirely. The old patterns do not vanish because they have been understood, but they diminish. They lose their automaticity, their grip, their invisibility, and in their place something grows, a slowly developing trust between a person and their own capacity to begin. Not certainty, not the absence of fear, but something closer to a willingness, a recognition that the discomfort of beginning is survivable, and that what waits on the other side of it is worth more than any amount of time spent in the relative safety of not having started. This is the life that becomes possible. Not a perfect life, not a life without resistance or delay or moments of avoidance, but a life in which those moments no longer define the whole, a life in which the distance between who a person is and who they intend to be begins, slowly and genuinely, to close. Before we arrive at our closing reflection, a moment to mention that Stillness Audiobooks has many other original audiobooks exploring the inner life, anxiety, overthinking, emotional patterns, the search for clarity and rest. If this one has resonated with you, subscribing and turning on notifications means you will never miss what arrives next. These are audiobooks made for the quiet hours, the commute, the evening, the space between one thing and the next. Conclusion: what it means to finally begin. Throughout these chapters, we have seen that procrastination is not a simple failure of discipline. It is a complex, deeply human response, rooted in early learning, sustained by emotional loops, hidden beneath layers of identity and self-story, and maintained by patterns that serve a purpose, even when that purpose has long since expired. We have seen how the daily life of the procrastinating mind carries a particular and exhausting texture, and how the path forward is not one of harder effort, but of clearer understanding. What does this mean for your journey? It means perhaps that the harshest conclusions you have drawn about yourself in relation to this pattern deserve to be reconsidered, not dismissed. There is always value in honest self-examination, but reconsidered with the knowledge that what you have been living with is not a character flaw. It is a learned response. And learned responses, unlike character flaws, are responsive to awareness, to patience, to the kind of gentle, persistent attention that this audiobook has tried to model. It means that the first step is not a grand one. It is not the complete overhaul of a system or the absolute transformation of a self. It is simply the next small beginning, the one that is available right now in whatever quiet corner of your life it is waiting, the email that has been sitting there, the page that has not yet been opened, the conversation that has been rehearsed but not yet spoken. These are not tests of worthiness. They are simply the raw material of a life in motion. And it means, finally, that the procrastinating mind, your mind, is not something to be ashamed of or at war with. It is something to be understood. It developed for reasons. It protected you in ways that once mattered, and it is capable, with time and with the kind of honest attention you have brought to this listening, of learning something new. The stillness that many seek is not the stillness of nothing happening. It is the stillness of a mind that is no longer at war with itself, of a person who has stopped spending their energy managing the distance between who they are and who they mean to be, and has begun simply and without ceremony to close it. Thank you for this shared journey. If this audiobook has been a companion worth keeping, the Stillness Audiobooks channel is a place worth returning to. Follow along and let the next hour of reflection find you when you need it. End of the audiobook.